Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. I played Minecraft Ouija board mode. The next day, my friend brought me Ouija board as a present. Hey everyone, I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating at me. This might sound like some BS, but I swear on everything this really happened. The whole thing started last Saturday night when I was up late playing Minecraft. I know, it sounds lame, but hear me out. I was scrolling through some mods, looking for something new to spice things up, and I stumbled across this one called Ouija board mode. The description was all cryptic and weird, saying stuff like commune with the spirits of Minecraft and experience the game like never before. It had a ton of downloads and reviews saying how crazy it was, so I thought, why not? I downloaded it and started a new world. Everything seemed normal at first, just your typical Minecraft world. But then I crafted this Ouija board item, which took a mix of weird materials like bones, redstone, and obsidian. Once I placed it down and right-clicked, the game suddenly got different. The screen dimmed, and this eerie low chant started playing in the background. A message popped up. Do you wish to commune with the spirits? Of course, I clicked yes, and that's when things got weird. The board in the game moved on its own, spelling out words like help, trapped, and release. I was getting chills, but I kept going, half curious, half scared. At one point it spelled out look behind you. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a trick to freak players out. But then my room got cold, like ice cold. I turned around and I swear I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye. I spun back to my screen and the game had frozen. When it unfroze, my character was in a dark cave, the Ouija board broken on the ground. I couldn't control my character anymore. It moved on its own, deeper into the cave, where the walls seemed to bleed and there were whispers all around. The whispers got louder, turning into screams. The screen went black and my computer shut down. Freaked out, I decided to call it a night and went to bed. The next day, I was hanging out with my buddy Jake. We usually chill at his place on Sundays, just playing games or watching movies. I told him about the weird Minecraft mod, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he got really serious and told me that messing with Ouija boards, even in games, is a bad idea. He said he had a bad experience with one as a kid and warned me not to mess with that stuff. I shrugged it off, but then he got this weird look on his face and said he had something to show me. He went to his closet and pulled out an old, dusty Ouija board. Consider this a late birthday present, he said with a smirk. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but he insisted we try it out. Reluctantly, I agreed. We set it up on his living room floor, lit some candles to set the mood, and placed our fingers on the planchette. At first, nothing happened. We asked the usual questions. Is anyone here? What's your name? And got no response. I was about to call it quits when the planchette started to move. At first, I thought Jake was messing with me, but the look on his face told me he wasn't. The board spelled out hello. My heart started racing. We asked who it was, and it spelled Steve. I laughed nervously. Steve? Like Minecraft Steve? The planchette moved to yes. That's when things got really freaky. The board started spelling out messages rapidly. Things like trapped, help me, and not a game. The candles flickered, and the room got cold, just like the night before. I was about to suggest we stop when the planchette moved again, spelling out, look outside. We both turned to look at the window, and I swear I saw a shadowy figure standing there. It was tall, with glowing eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. Jake and I looked at each other, pale and freaked out. We decided to close the session, but before we could say goodbye, the planchette moved on its own, spelling out one last message. Too late. Suddenly, the lights went out, and the room was plunged into darkness. We heard a low growl, and the sound of something scratching at the walls. The candles went out, leaving us in pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, using the screen's light to see, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Standing in the corner of the room was a figure, tall and shadowy, with those same glowing eyes. It moved towards us slowly, deliberately. We bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Jake was screaming, and I was pounding on the door, desperate to get out. Just as the figure reached us, the lights flickered back on, and it was gone. The door opened easily, and we stumbled out into the hallway, shaking and terrified. We never talked about what happened next, just grabbed our stuff and left his place as fast as we could. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes staring back at me. I could hear whispers in the dark, telling me it wasn't over, that I'd invited something in. And I knew, deep down, that it was right. I'll post more about what happened in the next few days, but for now, I need a break. I need to figure out how to fix this, how to get rid of whatever we unleashed. If anyone has any ideas, please let me know. I'm desperate, and I don't think I can handle this alone. Hey everyone, thanks for all the comments and suggestions on my last post. Sorry for the delay, but things have gotten even weirder, and I needed some time to wrap my head around it all. Here's what happened next. After that terrifying night at Jake's, I was a mess. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see that shadowy figure. I kept hearing whispers, feeling like I was being watched. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next day, I went back to Jake's place. We needed to figure out what to do. He looked as bad as I felt, with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted expression. We agreed to destroy the Ouija board, thinking it might help. We took it to the backyard, poured gasoline over it, and set it on fire. As it burned, I swore I heard a scream, but Jake said it was just the wind. That night, I was home alone, still shaken. I had left all the lights on, every damn one. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jake. Come over. I found something. My heart sank. I didn't want to go back there, but I needed answers. When I got to his place, it was eerily quiet. The front door was slightly ajar, which was weird. I pushed it open and called out for Jake, but there was no answer. The living room was empty, but something felt off. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. I noticed a faint smell, like something rotting. I followed the smell to Jake's room, and what I saw made me gag. His room was trashed, furniture overturned, and there were these weird symbols drawn on the walls in what looked like blood. The Ouija board we had burned was back, sitting in the center of his room, untouched by the flames. Jake was nowhere to be found. I searched the whole house, panic rising with every empty room. Then I heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from the basement. My heart pounded as I crept towards the basement door. It was open, and the stairs descended into pitch blackness. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to run, but I couldn't leave without finding Jake. I used my phone's flashlight and slowly made my way down the creaky steps. The smell was stronger here, almost unbearable. When I reached the bottom, the light barely penetrated the darkness. I called out for Jake again, and this time I got a response. A weak, trembling voice whispered, "Help me." I followed the voice to the far corner of the basement. Jake was there, curled up and shaking, his eyes wide with terror. I rushed to him, asking what happened, but he just kept mumbling, "It's here, it's here." Before I could react, something cold grabbed my ankle. I looked down and saw a shadowy hand emerging from the darkness, gripping me tightly. I kicked and screamed, trying to break free, but it pulled harder, dragging me towards the center of the basement. Jake snapped out of his daze and started hitting the hand with a broken piece of wood. The grip loosened, and I scrambled back, pulling Jake with me. We bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind us. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping for breath. We decided to stay at my place that night, too freaked out to be alone. We barricaded ourselves in the living room, keeping all the lights on. Jake finally opened up about what he'd found. He had done some research and found out that the mod I downloaded was part of a dark web ritual designed to summon spirits through digital means. Apparently, the creator was some kind of cultist, who believed that technology could bridge the gap between our world and the spirit world. Jake showed me his phone, where he had bookmarked a bunch of forums and articles about similar experiences. People who had used the mod reported strange occurrences, hauntings, and even disappearances. One story stood out. A guy who said he saw the same shadowy figure, and it followed him everywhere, even in his dreams. We spent the next few hours reading and trying to come up with a plan. Most people who had similar experiences said the only way to get rid of the spirit was to perform a cleansing ritual. Neither of us knew much about that stuff, but we were desperate. Around 3 a.m, we gathered what we needed: salt, sage, candles, and a prayer we found online. We started the ritual in my living room, drawing a circle of salt around us and lighting the sage. We recited the prayer, asking for protection and cleansing. As we chanted, the temperature dropped and the whispers grew louder. Suddenly, the candles blew out, plunging us into darkness. My heart raced, and I fumbled for my phone to turn on the flashlight. When the light came on, Jake was gone. The circle of salt was broken, and I was alone. I called out for Jake, but there was no response. The whispers were deafening now, and I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, and there it was. The shadowy figure, those glowing eyes piercing the darkness. I screamed, and the figure lunged at me. I felt its icy grip around my throat, squeezing the life out of me. I struggled, kicking and clawing, but it was too strong. Just as I thought I was done for, the front door burst open, and Jake ran in, holding a lit candle. The light from the candle seemed to weaken the figure, and it released its grip. I gasped for air as Jake dragged me out of the house. We didn't stop running until we reached the end of the street. We spent the rest of the night in a motel, too scared to go back. We knew we couldn't stay there forever, but we had no idea what to do next. The ritual had failed, and the spirit was still with us. The next day, we packed up our things and decided to leave town. We didn't have a plan, just a desperate need to get as far away as possible. But deep down, I knew we couldn't run from this. Whatever we had unleashed, it was with us now, and it wasn't going to let us go. I'll update you all soon. If anyone has any other ideas or knows how to deal with this, please let me know. We're running out of options, and I'm terrified of what will happen next. After leaving town, Jake and I drove for hours, not really caring where we ended up. We just needed to get away. We ended up in a small town a few hundred miles away, checked into a cheap motel, and tried to come up with a new plan. That night, we didn't sleep much. Every little sound made us jump. Around 3 a.m, I heard scratching at the window. I looked over, and there it was again, that shadowy figure with glowing eyes staring in at us. I yelled for Jake, and by the time he looked, it was gone. He told me I was just seeing things, but I knew what I saw. We decided to contact a professional, someone who actually knew about paranormal stuff. After some searching, we found a guy named Alex, who lived about an hour away and claimed to be an expert in dealing with hauntings and malevolent spirits. Desperate, we gave him a call. Alex agreed to meet us at his place. When we arrived, he didn't seem surprised by our story. He'd heard it all before, he said, and he could help us. But it wasn't going to be easy. He explained that spirits summoned through digital means were different. They were more powerful, more malevolent, and harder to get rid of. He told us we needed to perform a more intense cleansing ritual, one that required us to confront the spirit directly. It was dangerous, but we didn't have any other options. Alex gave us a list of supplies and instructions, and we spent the rest of the day gathering everything we needed. That night, we set up the ritual in Alex's basement. It was dark and cold, with an eerie vibe that made my skin crawl. We drew a circle of salt, lit candles, and placed protective sigils around the room. Alex instructed us to sit in the circle and hold hands, while he chanted an ancient prayer. As he started the chant, the temperature dropped, and the whispers began again. This time, they were louder, more insistent. The candles flickered, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive. I felt a presence, something dark and cold, moving closer. Suddenly, the candles went out, plunging us into darkness. The whispers turned into screams, and I felt something icy grip my arm. I looked over and saw the shadowy figure, its glowing eyes burning into me. I screamed, but Alex's chanting grew louder, more urgent. The figure moved closer, its hand tightening around my arm. I felt its cold breath on my face, and the room filled with the stench of decay. I could see Jake's terrified face, his eyes wide with fear. We were trapped, and I could feel the life being drained from me. Just as I thought it was over, Alex shouted a final word, and a blinding light filled the room. The figure let out a deafening scream and vanished, leaving us gasping for breath. The candles flickered back to life, and the room felt warmer, safer. Alex explained that we had weakened the spirit, but it wasn't gone. We needed to finish the ritual to banish it completely. He told us we had to go back to where it all started, back to Jake's house. We didn't want to, but we knew we had no choice. The drive back was tense, filled with silence, and the occasional glance at the back seat, half expecting to see the figure there. When we arrived at Jake's place, it looked the same, but the air felt heavy, oppressive. We set up the ritual again, this time in the living room where it all began. The symbols were still on the walls, the remnants of our failed attempt mocking us. We drew the circle, lit the candles, and began the chant. As the ritual progressed, the whispers returned, louder and more aggressive. The room grew colder, and shadows danced around us. The figure appeared again, its eyes glowing with anger. It lunged at us, but this time we were ready. We held hands, chanting louder, our voices shaking but determined. The figure screamed, a sound that pierced through my soul, but we kept going. The light grew brighter, pushing the darkness back. The figure thrashed and writhed, its form flickering. Finally, with one last agonized scream, it disappeared. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. We collapsed, exhausted but relieved. Alex confirmed that the spirit was gone, but warned us to be careful. We had opened a door, and other things could still come through. Jake and I thanked Alex and promised to be more cautious in the future. We spent the night cleaning up, trying to erase the traces of the nightmare we had lived through. As we finished, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. That night, we stayed up, keeping watch, too scared to sleep. Every creak, every rustle made us jump, but the shadowy figure didn't return. As dawn broke, we finally allowed ourselves to relax, if only a little. We knew we couldn't stay in that house, not after everything that had happened. We packed our things and left, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. But even now, as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that we're not alone, that something is still out there, watching, waiting. If you've made it this far, thank you. And if you ever come across a mod called Ouija board mode, stay far, far away. It's not just a game, it's a doorway, and some doors should never be opened. After leaving Jake's house, we decided to stay with an old friend, Sarah. She lived a few towns over, and we hoped that putting some distance between us and the nightmare would help. Sarah was more than willing to help, especially after hearing our story. She'd always been into the paranormal, so she didn't doubt us for a second. We settled into her place, trying to find some sense of normalcy. For the first few nights, things were quiet. No shadows, no whispers, just the usual sounds of a creaky old house. I started to think maybe we were finally free. But then, on the fourth night, things took a turn for the worse. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a familiar cold chill. My heart sank. I looked around the room, but nothing seemed out of place. I tried to shake off the feeling and go back to sleep, but then I heard it. Scratching. At first, it was faint, like a mouse in the walls, but it grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the closet. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my hand shaking. I slowly approached the closet, the scratching growing louder with each step. I reached out, hesitating, then yanked the door open. Nothing. The closet was empty. I let out a shaky breath, half relieved, half terrified. As I turned to go back to bed, I saw it. The shadowy figure, standing at the foot of my bed, those glowing eyes boring into me. I screamed, scrambling backward, but it didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Jake and Sarah burst into the room, and as soon as they entered, the figure vanished. I tried to explain what happened, but I could tell they thought I was losing it. Jake suggested we do another cleansing ritual, but I wasn't sure it would work. Still, we were desperate. The next day, we gathered our supplies and set up in Sarah's living room. We drew the salt circle, lit the candles, and started the chant. This time, Sarah joined in, her voice steady and confident. As we chanted, the room grew colder, the whispers starting again. Suddenly, the candles blew out, and the room was plunged into darkness. The whispers turned into screams, and I felt that familiar icy grip around my throat. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I could see Jake and Sarah struggling, their faces contorted in fear. Then, the lights flickered back on, and the figure was there, standing in the center of the circle, its eyes burning with rage. It reached out, and I felt its icy fingers wrap around my neck, squeezing. I gasped for breath, clawing at its hand, but it was too strong. Just as I thought I was done for, Sarah stepped forward, holding a crucifix. She shouted a prayer, her voice shaking but determined. The figure recoiled, hissing, and its grip loosened. Jake grabbed me, pulling me out of the circle. The figure thrashed and writhed, its form flickering. With one final agonized scream, it disappeared. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. We collapsed, exhausted but relieved. Sarah confirmed that the spirit was gone, but warned us to be careful. We had opened a door, and other things could still come through. We spent the next few days on edge, but things seemed to return to normal. No more shadows, no more whispers. I started to think maybe we had finally beaten it. But then, one night, Sarah woke up screaming. I rushed to her room, finding her sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with terror. She told me she had a nightmare about the shadowy figure, but it felt so real. She described how it had spoken to her, telling her that it wasn't finished with us, that it would never leave. I tried to comfort her, but deep down, I felt the same fear. What if we hadn't gotten rid of it? What if it was still out there waiting? We couldn't stay at Sarah's place forever, and we knew we had to find a permanent solution. We decided to seek out a medium, someone who could communicate with spirits and maybe help us get rid of it for good. After some searching, we found a woman named Claire, who had a reputation for dealing with malevolent entities. We made an appointment and hoped for the best. The day of our appointment, we arrived at Claire's house, a small, old-fashioned place at the edge of town. She welcomed us in, her demeanor calm and reassuring. She listened to our story, nodding thoughtfully, then told us she could help. Claire set up her space, lighting candles and burning sage. She instructed us to sit in a circle and hold hands while she performed the seance. As she began, the room grew cold, and the whispers started again. Claire's voice was strong and steady as she called out to the spirit, demanding it show itself. The room darkened, and the figure appeared, its eyes glowing with anger. Claire didn't flinch. She spoke to it, her words powerful and commanding. The figure hissed and thrashed, but Claire held her ground, pushing it back. Suddenly, the figure lunged at her, its form flickering wildly. Claire shouted a final incantation, and a blinding light filled the room. The figure let out a deafening scream and vanished. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. Claire confirmed that the spirit was gone for good, but warned us to be careful. We had opened a door, and other things could still come through. We thanked her, feeling a sense of relief, but also lingering fear. That night, we finally slept peacefully, hoping that the nightmare was truly over. But even now, as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching us, that the door we opened might never fully close. If you've made it this far, thank you. And if you ever come across a mod called Ouija board mode, stay far, far away. It's not just a game, it's a doorway, and some doors should never be opened. After the seance with Claire, things finally started to calm down. Jake, Sarah, and I felt like we could breathe again. For the first time in weeks, we slept without nightmares or disturbances. It seemed like the shadowy figure was truly gone, but that sense of peace didn't last long. A few days later, I got a call from my mum. She sounded frantic, telling me that weird things were happening at the house. She described seeing shadows moving, hearing whispers, and feeling cold spots. My heart sank. Whatever we had unleashed had found its way to my family. I rushed home, terrified of what I might find. When I got there, my mum looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. She told me the disturbances started a few days ago, right after we finished the séance. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. We had gotten rid of the spirit, but it had latched onto someone else, my family. Jake and Sarah came over to help. We explained everything to my mum, who took it surprisingly well. She had always been open to the paranormal, but this was pushing her limits. We decided to perform another cleansing ritual, hoping to finally banish the spirit once and for all. We set up in the living room, drawing a circle of salt and lighting candles. As we began the chant, the temperature dropped and the whispers returned. The room felt heavy, oppressive, like a storm was about to break. The shadowy figure appeared again, more furious than ever. Its eyes burned with rage, and it moved towards us faster than before. We held hands, chanting louder, our voices shaking. The figure lunged, and the candles flickered violently. Suddenly, my mum screamed. I turned and saw her being pulled towards the figure by an invisible force. Jake and I grabbed her, pulling her back into the circle. The figure thrashed, its form flickering wildly. It let out a deafening scream, and the lights went out, plunging us into darkness. We continued chanting, our voices the only sound in the room. I felt the cold grip around my throat again, squeezing tighter and tighter. I gasped for breath, but didn't stop chanting. The figure was right in front of me now, its eyes burning into mine. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, a blinding light filled the room. The figure screamed, a sound that seemed to shake the very walls. It thrashed and writhed, then vanished in a burst of light. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. We collapsed, exhausted and shaken. My mum was crying, clutching us tightly. We stayed like that for a while, too scared to move, too relieved to care. Eventually we got up and began cleaning up, hoping that this time it was really over. The next few days were tense, but peaceful. No more shadows, no more whispers. My mum slept better, and the house felt lighter. It seemed like we had finally beaten it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only delayed the inevitable, that the door we had opened might never fully close. I decided to take extra precautions, setting up protective wards and symbols around the house, anything to keep the darkness at bay. One night, as I was falling asleep, I heard a faint whisper. My heart raced, but I didn't open my eyes. I didn't want to see if the shadowy figure was there. I just kept repeating to myself that it was over, that we were safe. Weeks turned into months, and the disturbances never returned. Jake, Sarah, and I tried to move on with our lives, but the experience left a mark on us. We were more cautious, more wary of the unknown. And then, one day, I got an email. It was from an unknown sender with no subject. The message was short, just a single sentence. You opened the door. My blood ran cold. I showed it to Jake and Sarah, and they looked just as scared as I felt. We knew we couldn't ignore it, but we also knew we couldn't let it control our lives. We had to stay vigilant, but we couldn't let fear consume us. If you've made it this far, thank you. And if you ever come across a mod called Ouija board mode, stay far, far away. It's not just a game, it's a doorway, and some doors should never be opened. I hope this is the end of my story, but if anything changes, I'll be sure to let you know. Stay safe, everyone. I found the love of my life through the Ouija board. I think I am possessed. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be posting something like this, but here I am, terrified out of my mind and unsure if I'm even still me. I need to get this out. and maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. It all started about 6 months ago. I've always been kind of into the paranormal. You know, the usual. Ghost hunting shows, horror movies, and urban legends. It was just a fun way to get a thrill. I never really believed any of it. That changed one night when my friends and I were drinking and someone brought up the idea of using a Ouija board. We were at my buddy Mike's place. It was a typical Saturday night. Beers, pizza, and talking crap about everything and nothing. Sarah, Mike's girlfriend, had recently bought a Ouija board as a joke. She pulled it out, and we all laughed it off. But there was a part of me that was genuinely curious. Could this actually work? We dimmed the lights, lit some candles, and gathered around the board. There were 5 of us. Me, Mike, Sarah, Tony, and Jess. We put our fingers on the planchette and started asking the usual dumb questions like, "Is anyone here?" and "What's your name?" For a long time, nothing happened. We were about to call it quits when the planchette started moving. At first, we all thought it was someone messing with us, but it quickly became clear that none of us were doing it. The planchette spelled out EMMA. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. The planchette moved again, spelling out LOVER. We laughed nervously. "Yeah, right," Mike said. "What's your last name, Emma?" KEEP. "Keep," Tony repeated. "What kind of last name is that?" "She's fucking with us," Jess said, but I wasn't so sure. There was something cold in the air, a chill that crawled up my spine. "What do you want?" I asked, half expecting the planchette to stay still. It moved almost violently to spell YOU. Everyone freaked out a bit at that. We decided to end the session. Sarah packed the board away, and we all tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That night, I had a dream, or at least I think it was a dream. I was lying in my bed when I felt a weight on my chest, like someone was sitting on me. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. In the darkness, I saw a figure, a woman with long, dark hair and hollow eyes. She leaned in close and whispered, "I'm here for you." I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for breath. My room felt wrong, like the air was thicker. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I told my friends about the dream. They laughed it off, saying it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was real. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. I started seeing her everywhere, in the reflections of mirrors, in the corners of rooms, always watching me with those empty eyes. I began to hear her voice, soft at first, whispering my name. It grew louder, more insistent. She started telling me things, horrible things. She knew my deepest fears, my darkest secrets. She told me I belonged to her, that we were meant to be together. I tried to ignore her, to tell myself it was all in my head, but she wouldn't let me. Every night, she came to me in my dreams. I stopped sleeping, terrified of what I'd see. My friends noticed I was acting strange, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I explain that I was being haunted by a spirit I'd summoned with a stupid game? One night, I decided I had to do something. I did some research and found out how to properly close a Ouija board session. I convinced Sarah to let me use the board again, hoping I could send Emma back. I sat alone in my room, the board laid out in front of me. I lit some candles and placed my fingers on the planchette. "Emma," I said, "I'm here. What do you want?" The planchette moved immediately. "YOU. Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "BECAUSEILOVEYOU. This has to stop," I said. "You need to go back." The planchette didn't move. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I froze. Her voice was in my ear, cold and venomous. "You're mine!" I screamed and threw the board across the room. The candles blew out, and my room was plunged into darkness. I felt her hands on me, cold and claw-like, dragging me down. I blacked out. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor. The board was gone, and my room looked like a tornado had hit it. I had scratches all over my arms, and I could still feel her presence. She wasn't gone. She was inside me. That was 3 months ago. Since then, Things have only gotten worse. I hear her voice constantly, telling me to do things, horrible things. I see her in the mirror, standing behind me, her eyes empty and black. She's taken over my life, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I don't know what to do, Reddit. I'm scared, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. Has anyone else experienced something like this? How do I get rid of her? How do I take my life back? Please, if you have any advice, I'm desperate. Hey Reddit, I'm back. After posting part 1, I've been flooded with messages and comments, and honestly, I appreciate the support. I need to continue this because things have only gotten worse. After that night, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I decided to tell Mike everything. He was skeptical, of course, but he agreed to come over and help me figure this out. We decided to do another Ouija session, this time to demand Emma to leave. Mike came over last Friday. We set up the board in my living room, just like before. I was terrified, but Mike kept reassuring me that we could handle it. We placed our fingers on the planchette, and I took a deep breath. Emma, I called out, are you here? The planchette moved slowly to yes. Why are you haunting me? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. ILOVEYOU, it spelled out again. Emma, you need to leave. This isn't right. You're hurting me. YOUAREMINE. Mike looked at me, his face pale. Dude, this is messed up. I know, I said. Emma, what can I do to make you leave? The planchette didn't move for a long time. We sat there in silence, waiting. Then, it started to spell out something that made my blood run cold. KILLTHEM. What? Mike whispered. Kill who? WHOYOULOVE. Mike pulled his hands away from the planchette. That's it, man. We're done. This is insane. But I couldn't stop. Emma, I won't do that. You can't make me. ICAN. That night, Mike stayed over. We didn't touch the board again, but I could feel Emma's presence growing stronger. She whispered in my ear, telling me how much she loved me, how we were destined to be together. She told me she would make sure I was hers, no matter what. I started to lose chunks of time. I'd wake up in strange places around my house, with no memory of how I got there. I found notes in my handwriting, but I didn't remember writing them. They were love letters to Emma, describing how much I wanted to be with her, how I'd do anything for her. I found one note that simply said, I will kill for you. I was terrified. I started locking myself in my room at night, trying to keep her out, but it didn't work. She was inside me. I could feel her controlling my thoughts, pushing me to the edge. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. My friends noticed, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I explain that I was being possessed by a spirit I'd summoned with a Ouija board? Then, a few days ago, things took a turn for the worse. I was out with Sarah and Tony, trying to pretend everything was normal. We went to a bar, had a few drinks, and tried to have a good time, but Emma wouldn't leave me alone. I saw her in the crowd, her hollow eyes watching me, her mouth twisted into a smile. I started to feel strange, like I was losing control. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, splashing water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, I saw her standing behind me, her hands on my shoulders. You're mine, she whispered. I blacked out. When I came to, I was sitting in a police station. My hands were covered in blood. The officers told me I'd been found in an alley, standing over a body, Sarah's body. She was dead, stabbed multiple times. I had the knife in my hand. I tried to explain that it wasn't me, that it was Emma, but they didn't believe me. Who would? I'm out on bail now, waiting for my trial. I know I'm screwed. They have all the evidence they need. But it wasn't me. It was her. Every night she comes to me. I see her in my dreams, feel her hands around my throat, hear her laughter echoing in my head. She tells me I'll be with her soon, that we'll be together forever. I don't know how much longer I can take this. Reddit, I'm begging you. If anyone has any idea how to get rid of a spirit, how to break this possession, please help me. I'm losing my mind and I don't know how much longer I can fight her. Hey Reddit, I'm back again. Thanks for all the messages and advice. I read every single one of them. Some of you suggested exorcisms, Some recommended seeing a psychiatrist. I've tried a bit of both, but things have only gotten worse. I need to continue this story because I think I'm running out of time. After being released on bail, I decided to take some of your advice. I found a local priest who specialized in exorcisms. His name was Father Matthews, and he seemed skeptical at first. When I told him everything, he listened quietly, nodding occasionally. After a long silence, he agreed to help me. Father Matthews came over last week. He brought holy water, a crucifix, and a Bible. He set everything up in my living room and began to pray. I felt a sense of relief at first, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this would work. But as soon as he started the exorcism, things took a dark turn. The room grew cold, unnaturally so. The candles flickered and then went out, plunging us into darkness. Father Matthews continued to pray, his voice steady, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I felt a pressure building in my chest, like something was trying to tear its way out of me. Suddenly, I was thrown across the room, hitting the wall hard. Father Matthews ran to me, chanting louder, holding the crucifix in front of him. I screamed as a burning sensation spread through my body. Emma's voice filled the room, mocking and cruel. "He's mine! You can't have him!" Father Matthews sprinkled holy water on me, and it felt like acid on my skin. I writhed in pain, trying to fight off the feeling that I was being torn apart from the inside. Emma's laughter echoed in my ears, drowning out everything else. I could see her now, standing behind Father Matthews, her eyes glowing with malevolent delight. She reached out and touched him, and he collapsed to the floor, clutching his chest. I crawled over to him, but it was too late. He was dead. I could feel her triumph, her power growing stronger. She had won. After that night, I knew I was alone in this. Emma was inside me, controlling me. I could feel her influence growing every day. I started seeing things, terrible things, visions of death and pain, of people I cared about being hurt. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her voice. I tried going to a psychiatrist, Dr. Whitmore. He listened to my story, nodded sympathetically, and prescribed me some antipsychotics. I took them, hoping they would help, but they didn't. If anything, they made things worse. The visions became more vivid, more real. I started to doubt my own sanity. Last night was the worst yet. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I felt her presence. She was in the room with me, watching me. I tried to ignore her, to pretend she wasn't there. But then she spoke. "You can't escape me," she whispered. "We're meant to be together." I felt a weight on my chest, like someone was sitting on me. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. Her face appeared above me, her eyes boring into mine. She leaned down, her lips inches from mine. "You will be mine forever," she said. I blacked out again. When I woke up, I was in my kitchen. The walls were covered in blood. I looked down and saw a knife in my hand. My heart pounded as I realized what I'd done. I found my neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, lying on the floor, her eyes wide open, her throat slit. I dropped the knife and ran out of the house, not knowing what to do. I ended up at a motel, where I'm writing this now. I can still feel her inside me, growing stronger. I don't know how much longer I can fight her. Reddit, I'm desperate. If anyone has any ideas, any way to help me get rid of her, please let me know. I'm losing myself, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Hey Reddit, it's been a few days since my last post. I've barely slept, and I feel like I'm on the edge of something terrible. I'm at the end of my rope, and I need to tell you what's been happening. After I left the motel, I knew I couldn't go back to my house. It wasn't safe there. Emma was everywhere, in every shadow, every corner. I decided to stay with my friend Jess. I hadn't told her everything, just enough for her to understand that I needed help. She agreed to let me crash on her couch. The first night at Jess's place, I actually managed to sleep for a few hours, but it wasn't restful. I dreamt of Emma, as usual. She was more vivid, more real. She wasn't just a shadow anymore. She was flesh and blood, tangible. I could feel her cold skin against mine, hear her breath in my ear. "You can't hide from me," she whispered. "I'll find you wherever you go." I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. Jess was sitting across the room, watching me with concern. "You were screaming," she said. "Are you okay?" I nodded, but I knew I wasn't. I could still feel Emma's touch, like ice burning into my skin. I told Jess about the dream, and she suggested we try another method. She had a friend, a psychic named Lydia, who she swore was legit. Desperate, I agreed to meet her. Lydia's place was a small, cluttered apartment, filled with strange artifacts and the smell of incense. She was an older woman with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. Jess explained the situation, and Lydia nodded thoughtfully. "We need to make contact," Lydia said, "but on our terms, not hers." She set up a circle of candles and instructed me to sit in the middle. She and Jess sat outside the circle, holding hands. Lydia began to chant in a language I didn't understand. The air grew heavy, and I felt a familiar chill creeping over me. "Emma," Lydia called out, "we summon you. Show yourself." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the candles flickered and went out. The room plunged into darkness. I heard a low, guttural laugh, and Emma's voice filled the room. "You can't banish me. He belongs to me." Lydia didn't flinch. "Why are you tormenting him? What do you want?" "I want him," Emma replied, her voice echoing around us. "He is mine. We are bound together." "Release him," Lydia demanded. "Let him go." Emma's laughter grew louder. "You can't make me leave. I am a part of him now." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like a knife twisting inside me. I screamed, clutching at my heart. Lydia chanted louder, but I could feel Emma's hold tightening. "He will die before I let him go," she hissed. Jess ran to me, trying to comfort me, but it was no use. The pain was unbearable. I felt like I was being ripped apart from the inside. Lydia's chanting grew desperate, but I could tell it wasn't working. Emma was too strong. Suddenly, the pain stopped. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Lydia and Jess helped me up, their faces pale with fear. "We need a stronger ritual," Lydia said. "Something to sever the bond completely." We decided to perform the ritual the next night, at an old abandoned church outside of town. Lydia said it was a place of power, somewhere we could break Emma's hold for good. I didn't have much hope, but I was willing to try anything. We arrived at the church just after sunset. The place was eerie, with its crumbling walls and overgrown graveyard. Lydia set up her candles and symbols inside, creating a protective circle. She handed me a small, ornate dagger. "You need to shed your blood," she said. "It's the only way to weaken her." I was terrified, but I nodded. Lydia began her chant again, and I made a small cut on my palm, letting the blood drip onto the circle. The air grew colder, and I could feel Emma's presence, angrier than ever. "You can't do this," she screamed. "He is mine," Lydia continued to chant, her voice steady and powerful. The candles flared, and I felt a force pulling at me, trying to tear me out of the circle. I held on, focusing on Lydia's voice, on the pain in my hand. Emma appeared before me, more real than ever. Her eyes were wild, her face twisted in rage. "You will die without me," she snarled. "We are bound by blood." "Release him," Lydia commanded, her voice booming in the empty church. Emma screamed, a sound of pure fury and despair. I felt something snap inside me, like a chain breaking. The pain intensified, and I collapsed to the floor, writhing in agony. Lydia's chanting grew louder, and I saw Emma's form flicker, growing fainter. With a final, ear-piercing scream, she vanished. The candles went out, and the room was plunged into silence. I lay there, gasping for breath, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt free. Lydia and Jess helped me up, their faces filled with hope. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice shaking. Lydia nodded. "I think so, but you need to be careful. The bond is broken, but she may still try to find a way back." I thanked her, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. We left the church, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. But even now, as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, watching, waiting. Reddit, I don't know what comes next. I'm scared, but I have to believe that I'm finally free. If anything changes, I'll let you know. But for now, thank you for listening, for your support. It means more than you can imagine. Hey Reddit, it's been a wild ride, and I wish I could tell you that everything is finally okay. But that wouldn't be true. Here's what happened after the ritual. After leaving the church, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. Lydia advised me to keep a low profile, to avoid anything that might draw Emma back. Jess and I returned to her place, and for the first time in forever, I slept without nightmares. The next few days were uneventful. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. I even started making plans to move away, to start fresh somewhere new. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emma wasn't gone, just waiting. Then, last night, everything came crashing down. Jess and I were watching TV when I felt a familiar chill. The lights flickered, and I knew Emma was back. Jess saw the look on my face. "What is it?" she asked. But before I could answer, the room plunged into darkness. I heard Emma's voice, a whisper in my ear. "Did you really think you could escape me?" I screamed, the sound echoing through the house. Jess tried to grab me, but I was thrown across the room by an unseen force. Emma's presence was overpowering, more intense than ever. She appeared in front of me, more real than before, her eyes burning with rage. "You can't leave me," she hissed. "We are bound forever." I tried to fight her, but it was useless. She was inside my head, controlling me. I felt my body move against my will, felt my hands wrap around Jess's throat. I could see the terror in her eyes, but I couldn't stop. Then, out of nowhere, Lydia burst into the room. She held a large crucifix and a vial of holy water. She shouted ancient words, her voice commanding and powerful. Emma screamed, her grip on me loosening. Lydia threw the holy water at Emma, and she recoiled, her form flickering. "You have no power here," Lydia shouted. "Leave him!" Emma's screams grew louder, more desperate. The room shook, and I felt like I was being torn apart. But Lydia didn't stop. She continued to chant, her voice unwavering. With a final, agonizing scream, Emma vanished. The lights flickered back on, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Lydia rushed to Jess, who was unconscious but alive. She turned to me, her face pale but determined. "We need to finish this once and for all." We returned to the church, Jess still unconscious. Lydia set up another circle, this time more elaborate. She explained that we needed to perform a final ritual to seal Emma away forever. I was terrified, but I knew it had to be done. The ritual was intense. Lydia chanted, her voice echoing in the empty church. I felt a cold wind swirling around us, and I knew Emma was fighting back. But Lydia didn't waver. She sprinkled my blood around the circle, the pain sharp but necessary. Emma appeared one last time, her form twisted and dark. "You can't do this," she screamed. "We are meant to be together." "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "You don't own me." Lydia's chanting reached a crescendo, and the candles flared bright. Emma screamed, her form dissolving into shadows. With a final, ear-piercing cry, she was gone. The room fell silent. Lydia collapsed, exhausted, but smiling. "It's done," she said. "She's gone." I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Jess began to stir, and I rushed to her side. She was weak, but alive. We helped Lydia out of the church, and I thanked her more times than I can count. Now I'm trying to piece my life back together. The trial is still ahead of me, and I know it won't be easy, but I have hope. Emma is gone, and I'm finally free. Thank you, Reddit, for your support and advice. I wouldn't have made it through without you. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we're stronger than the darkness that tries to consume us. Never give up. I tried to contact my ex-girlfriend to trough the Ouija board. "Hey everyone, I need to get this off my chest. I've been carrying this burden for too long, and it's eating me alive. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I swear on my life this is true. I'm not looking for sympathy or advice. I just need to share my story. So, a little background first. My name's Jake, and I'm 28. A few years ago, I was in a serious relationship with a girl named Emily. We were together for 3 years, and I genuinely thought she was the one. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but things took a dark turn when she started getting really into the occult. Emily was always a bit of a spiritual person, but this was different. She began dabbling in things that freaked me out. Dark magic, seances, and of course, the Ouija board. Emily became obsessed with it, claiming she could communicate with spirits. She'd spend hours alone in her room, talking to entities and jotting down notes. I tried to be supportive, but it was clear something was off. She'd often talk about a specific spirit named Azrael, who, according to her, was incredibly powerful and malevolent. She said he had taken a liking to her and communicated with her frequently. Things got worse when she started having violent outbursts and mood swings. One night, I woke up to find her standing over me, her eyes completely black. She was muttering something in a language I couldn't understand. I was terrified. I shook her, and she snapped out of it, but she had no memory of what happened. That was the last straw for me. I ended things with her shortly after that incident. A few months later, Emily was found dead in her apartment. The official cause of death was suicide, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. I tried to move on, but I couldn't get her out of my mind. I felt guilty, like maybe I could have done something to help her. Fast forward to last month, I was having a rough time. Work was stressful, I wasn't sleeping well, and I kept having these vivid nightmares about Emily. In one of the dreams, she was calling out to me, begging for help. I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. I knew it was crazy, but I felt like she was trying to reach out to me from the other side. Against my better judgment, I decided to try and contact her through a Ouija board. I know, it was stupid, but I was desperate for answers. I went online and ordered a board, along with some candles and other stuff to set the mood. The day it arrived, I cleared my apartment, set everything up, and waited until midnight. I sat down at the table, lit the candles, and placed the Ouija board in front of me. My hands were shaking as I placed them on the planchette. I took a deep breath and started the session. "Emily, are you here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. At first, nothing happened. I felt like an idiot sitting there in the dark, talking to a piece of wood. But then, the planchette started to move. Slowly, it spelled out, "Yes." My heart was racing. "Emily, is that really you?" I asked. Again, the planchette moved. "Yes." I felt a lump in my throat. "Emily, I'm so sorry for everything that happened. I need to know if you're okay." The planchette paused for a moment before spelling out, "No." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, no? What's going on? Where are you?" The planchette moved faster this time, spelling out hell. I felt like I was going to be sick. "Emily, how can I help you? What do you need me to do?" "Azrael." I froze. That name again. The same name she used to talk about. What does Azrael want? How can I help you? Dead. I couldn't believe what I was reading. "Emily, I can't do that. There has to be another way. No escape." I felt tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted to help her, but this was beyond anything I could handle. The room grew colder, and the candle flames flickered. I felt a presence behind me, and I was too scared to turn around. Suddenly, I heard a whisper in my ear. It was Emily's voice, but it sounded distorted, like she was speaking through a broken radio. "Jake, you shouldn't have contacted me. He's here now. He'll never let me go. And now he has you too." I screamed and threw the Ouija board across the room. The candles went out, and I was plunged into darkness. I scrambled to find the light switch, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally turned on the lights, the room was empty. The Ouija board lay broken on the floor, and the planchette was missing. I haven't slept properly since that night. I keep hearing strange noises in my apartment, and I feel like I'm being watched. I don't know what to do. I'm terrified that Azrael is coming for me next. Please, If anyone knows how to deal with this, help me. I can't take much more of this. Hey everyone, I'm back. I didn't expect so many responses to my last post, but I appreciate everyone who took the time to read it. To those who suggested ways to protect myself, thank you. I tried some of your suggestions, but things have only gotten worse. I need to continue this because I'm really scared and I don't know what else to do. After that terrifying night, I decided to get rid of the Ouija board. I took it to a nearby park and buried it deep in the ground, hoping that would be the end of it. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. In fact, they intensified. It started with small things, objects moving on their own, strange whispers in the middle of the night, and cold spots around my apartment. But then, the dreams started. Every night, I had the same nightmare. Emily would be standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes hollow and her face twisted in agony. She'd reach out to me, her fingers long and claw-like, and scream, "He's coming!" Then, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. One night, I woke up to find deep scratches on my arms. They weren't there when I went to bed. It felt like someone had been clawing at me while I slept. I checked the apartment, but everything seemed normal. I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus on anything other than what was happening to me. I spent the day researching Azrael and ways to protect myself from malevolent spirits. Most of what I found was contradictory or just plain ridiculous, but I was desperate. I decided to perform a cleansing ritual I found online. It required sage, salt, and a white candle. I followed the instructions to the letter, walking through each room, burning sage, and sprinkling salt in the corners. I kept chanting a protection prayer, hoping it would help. For a moment, I felt a bit of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That night, I went to bed feeling slightly more at ease, but my relief was short-lived. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing. It wasn't mine. I could feel the breath on my neck, hot and rancid. I froze, too terrified to move. Slowly, I turned my head and saw a shadowy figure standing by my bed. It had no discernible features, just a dark, looming presence. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure leaned closer, and I heard a low, guttural voice whisper, "You can't escape." Then it vanished. The room was dead silent, but the fear lingered. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I decided to visit Emily's grave. Maybe it was a bad idea, but I felt like I needed to face whatever this was head on. I drove to the cemetery, my heart heavy with dread. When I arrived, I found her grave easily. I stood there for a while, staring at her tombstone, feeling a mix of sadness and fear. "Emily, I'm so sorry," I whispered. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. As I spoke, the air around me grew colder. I heard a rustling noise behind me and turned to see a man standing there. He was dressed in old, tattered clothes, his face pale and gaunt. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice gravelly and weak. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "My name is Daniel. I was close to Emily. We used to talk a lot about the spirits she communicated with." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Did she mention Azrael?" Daniel's eyes widened with fear. "Yes. Azrael is a powerful demon. Emily thought she could control him, but she was wrong. He's the reason she's gone." I swallowed hard. "How do I stop him?" "You can't," Daniel said, shaking his head. "Once he sets his sights on you, it's over. The best you can do is try to protect yourself and hope he loses interest." He handed me a small, worn-out book. "This might help. It has some protection spells and rituals. It's not a guarantee, but it's better than nothing." I took the book, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Thank you. Be careful," Daniel said before turning and walking away. I spent the next few days poring over the book, trying to find anything that could help me. Most of the spells were complex, requiring ingredients I didn't have, but there was one ritual that seemed doable. It required a piece of iron, salt, and my own blood. I was supposed to create a protective circle and recite an incantation. That night, I gathered everything I needed and followed the instructions. I drew the circle, placed the iron in the center, and sprinkled salt around it. Then, I pricked my finger and let a few drops of blood fall into the circle. I recited the incantation, feeling a strange energy in the room. For a moment, it seemed like it worked. The air felt lighter and the oppressive feeling lifted. But then, I heard a loud bang, like something heavy had been thrown against the wall. The lights flickered, and I saw the shadowy figure again, standing just outside the circle. "You can't escape," it growled, its voice echoing in my head. I stayed in the circle, too scared to move. The figure just stood there, watching me. Hours passed, and I eventually fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. When I woke up, the figure was gone, but the fear remained. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I'm exhausted, terrified, and losing hope. If anyone out there has any advice or knows what to do, please help me. I'm desperate. Hey everyone, it's Jake again. I wish I could say things have gotten better, but they haven't. If anything, they've become even more terrifying. I'm starting to think there's no way out of this. I'm writing this now because I need to get it out there before it's too late. After that night with the protective circle, I decided to stay with my friend Mike for a few days. I needed to get out of my apartment and away from whatever was haunting me. Mike was a good guy, and he didn't ask too many questions when I showed up at his doorstep, looking like I hadn't slept in weeks. The first night at Mike's place was uneventful, and for the first time in a while, I felt a bit of peace. We played video games, drank some beers, and talked about anything but the nightmare I was living. I almost convinced myself that maybe it was all in my head, and that a change of scenery would fix everything. But then, the second night came. Mike had gone to bed early, and I stayed up to watch TV. Around midnight, I started to feel uneasy. The room grew colder, and I noticed my breath coming out in visible puffs. The TV began to flicker, and the same low guttural voice I had heard before echoed through the room. "You can't escape." I jumped up and looked around, but there was no one there. The shadows in the room seemed to move on their own, creeping along the walls like living things. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see the same shadowy figure standing in the corner, its form more defined this time. I could make out the vague shape of a face, twisted in a malicious grin. I backed away, my heart racing. "Leave me alone!" I shouted. The figure just stood there, unmoving. I grabbed my phone and called Mike, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial his number. "Jake, what's going on?" he answered, groggy and confused. "Mike, you need to come down here. Something's in the house." He didn't hesitate. Within minutes he was downstairs looking around. The figure was gone, but the cold, oppressive feeling remained. Mike could see the fear in my eyes, and for the first time, I told him everything. About Emily, the Ouija board, Azrael, and the nightmare that my life had become. Mike listened, his face growing more concerned with each passing moment. "Jake, this is serious. We need to get professional help. There are people who deal with this kind of stuff." The next day, Mike made some calls and found a local paranormal investigator named Sarah. She agreed to come over that evening and take a look at the situation. I was skeptical, but I was willing to try anything at that point. Sarah arrived around 7 p.m, a small woman with a calm demeanour that was surprisingly reassuring. She brought some equipment with her, EMF meters, a spirit box, and other tools I didn't recognise. She walked through the house, taking readings and making notes. "Whatever's here is powerful," she said finally. "I can feel its presence. It's feeding off your fear, Jake. We need to confront it and try to banish it." She set up a makeshift altar in the living room, placing candles, crystals, and other items around it. She instructed Mike and me to sit in a circle with her, and we joined hands. She began to chant, her voice steady and firm. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. As Sarah chanted, the room filled with a low, vibrating hum. The candles flickered violently, and I felt a pressure building in my chest. Suddenly, the spirit box crackled to life, spitting out words in a distorted, robotic voice. "Jake, can't escape!" I felt a sharp pain in my head, and images flashed before my eyes. Emily's face, twisted in agony, the shadowy figure looming over her, and the word Azrael burned into my mind. I squeezed Sarah's hand tighter, trying to stay focused. Sarah's chant grew louder, more insistent. The hum reached a crescendo, and then with a final shout, she called out, "Begone, Azrael! You have no power here!" The room exploded with light, blinding me. I felt a force pushing against me, and then everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, the room was back to normal. The oppressive feeling was gone, and the air felt lighter. Sarah slumped back, exhausted. "I think we did it," she said weakly. "But be careful, Jake. These things have a way of coming back. You need to stay vigilant." I thanked her, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Mike offered to let me stay as long as I needed, but I knew I couldn't impose on him forever. I stayed another night, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without nightmares. I returned to my apartment the next day, hoping that the ritual had worked. The place felt different, quieter, almost peaceful. I tried to get back to my normal routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. A week passed without incident. I started to relax, thinking maybe I had finally escaped Azrael's grasp. But last night, everything changed. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of someone crying. It was a soft, pitiful sound, like a child sobbing. I got out of bed and followed the noise to the living room. There, standing in the middle of the room, was Emily. She looked just like she did in my nightmares. Her eyes hollow, her face twisted in a mix of sorrow and pain. She reached out to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Jake, help me," she whispered. "He won't let me go." I felt a cold hand grip my heart. "Emily, what do you need me to do?" "Join me," she said, her voice breaking. "It's the only way." I stumbled back, shaking my head. "No, I can't." The room grew colder, and the shadows began to move again. The familiar voice of Azrael echoed through the room. "You can't escape." Emily's face twisted into a mask of terror. "Please, Jake, help me." I felt a force pulling me towards her, and I struggled to break free. I ran to the altar Sarah had set up, frantically searching for something, anything that could help. I found a small vial of holy water and splashed it around the room. Shouting the incantation Sarah had taught me, the shadows recoiled and Emily screamed, a sound that tore through me. She vanished, leaving me alone in the dark. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I'm scared to sleep, scared to stay in my apartment, scared to leave. Azrael is still out there, and I don't know how much longer I can hold him off. Please, if anyone has any more advice, I'm begging you, help me. Hey everyone, it's Jake again. I'm honestly surprised I'm still here to write this. Things have taken a turn for the worse, and I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I appreciate all the support and suggestions, but I think I'm in way over my head now. After the last encounter with Emily and Azrael, I decided I needed more help. I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to a well-known paranormal investigator named Dr. Richard Collins. He had a reputation for dealing with extreme cases, and I hoped he could offer some real solutions. Dr. Collins agreed to meet me at my apartment. When he arrived, he brought an assistant, a young woman named Lisa, who specialized in occult studies. They set up their equipment cameras, audio recorders, EMF detectors, and began their investigation. "This is serious, Jake," Dr. Collins said after a preliminary sweep. "The entity you're dealing with is incredibly powerful. Azrael is not just any spirit, he's a demon. Emily's connection to him has bound him to you," Lisa chimed in. "We're going to try and sever that connection. It's going to be dangerous, but it's your best shot at getting rid of him." They prepared for a ritual more intense than the one Sarah had performed. They set up a large circle with runes and symbols I didn't recognize, placed candles at strategic points, and drew complex patterns with chalk. The atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation and dread. "Jake, you'll need to sit in the center of the circle," Dr. Collins instructed. "This ritual requires your direct involvement. Stay focused, no matter what happens." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. As I took my place in the circle, Dr. Collins and Lisa began chanting in a language I didn't understand. The room seemed to vibrate with their words, and I felt a strange pressure building around me. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the candles flickered wildly. Suddenly, the shadowy figure of Azrael appeared at the edge of the circle, his form more menacing than ever. His eyes burned with a malevolent light, and his presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. "You think you can banish me?" Azrael's voice was a low, rumbling growl. "Fools, he is mine." The lights flickered, and a gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. Dr. Collins and Lisa continued chanting, their voices rising in intensity. Azrael stepped closer to the circle, his form distorting and shifting, as if he was struggling against an invisible barrier. "Jake, focus!" Dr. Collins shouted. "Remember why you're doing this." I closed my eyes, trying to concentrate on Emily, on freeing her from this nightmare. But then, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I opened my eyes to see Emily standing there, her face twisted in pain and fear. "Jake, help me," she pleaded. "He's hurting me." I felt torn, unsure of what to do. "Emily, I'm trying. Tell me how to help you. Join me," she whispered, her voice filled with desperation. "It's the only way." I looked at Dr. Collins, who was still chanting, his face strained with effort. "No, Jake," he shouted between chants. "It's a trick. Don't listen to her." I felt myself being pulled in two directions, torn between my love for Emily and my fear of Azrael. The pressure in the room intensified, and the chanting grew louder. Azrael's form grew more distorted, his rage palpable. "You cannot escape!" Azrael roared, his voice shaking the very walls of the apartment. The air around me grew colder, and I felt a crushing weight on my chest. I struggled to breathe, to focus. Dr. Collins and Lisa's voices seemed distant, fading into the background. All I could see was Emily, her eyes pleading with me. "Please, Jake," she whispered. "Help me." In that moment, I made a decision. I reached out to Emily, ignoring Dr. Collins' shouts of protest. As soon as our hands touched, a searing pain shot through my entire body. I screamed, feeling like my very soul was being torn apart. Azrael laughed, a deep, sinister sound that echoed through the room. "Foolish mortal, now you are truly mine." The room spun, and I felt myself being pulled into darkness. The last thing I heard was Dr. Collins's desperate chanting and Lisa's cries for me to hold on. I woke up on the floor of my apartment, disoriented and in pain. Dr. Collins and Lisa were beside me, looking exhausted and defeated. The circle was smeared and broken, the candles burnt out. "What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry and sore. "We failed," Dr. Collins said, his voice filled with regret. "Azrael is still here, and now he's bound to you even more tightly." Lisa helped me to my feet, her face pale and worried. "We need to leave, Jake. This place is no longer safe." I nodded, too weak to argue. We gathered what we could and left the apartment. Mike had offered his place again, but I didn't want to put him in danger. We found a small motel on the outskirts of town, hoping to regroup and figure out our next move. That night, I had another dream. Emily appeared, but this time, she looked different. Her eyes were empty, and her face was twisted into a cruel smile. "You can't escape, Jake," she said, her voice echoing with Azrael's. "You're mine now." I woke up screaming, the weight of the situation crashing down on me. I don't know how much longer I can fight this. Azrael is getting stronger, and I feel myself slipping away. If anyone out there has any more advice, any way to help, please, I'm begging you, help me. Hey everyone, it's Jake again. This will probably be my last update. Things have escalated beyond anything I could have imagined, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I appreciate all the support and advice, but it feels like I'm fighting a losing battle. After we left the apartment, Dr. Collins and Lisa decided to stay with me at the motel. They were determined to find a way to break Azrael's hold on me. We spent the next few days researching and preparing for one final attempt to banish the demon. Dr. Collins reached out to some of his contacts, gathering as much information as possible. Lisa spent hours poring over ancient texts and grimoires, searching for any clues. One night, as we were going over our plan, the lights in the motel room flickered and went out. The air grew cold. and a sense of dread filled the room. We grabbed flashlights and looked around, but nothing seemed out of place. Suddenly, the spirit box crackled to life on its own, spitting out words in a distorted, eerie voice. "Jake, come to me." My heart pounded in my chest. "He's here," I whispered, my voice trembling. Dr. Collins grabbed my arm. "We need to do this now. We can't wait any longer." We set up the circle in the center of the room, using the most potent protective symbols and ingredients we had. This time, we added a mirror at the edge of the circle, hoping it would trap Azrael's reflection and weaken him. I sat in the center, my hands shaking as Dr. Collins and Lisa began chanting. The air grew heavy with tension, and the room seemed to vibrate with their words. Shadows danced along the walls, and the temperature plummeted. The mirror fogged up, and a dark shape began to form within it. Azrael's face appeared, twisted and malevolent. "You cannot escape," he growled, his voice echoing through the room. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the chanting. I could feel Azrael's presence pressing down on me, suffocating me. The pain in my chest grew unbearable, and I struggled to breathe. Dr. Collins' voice grew louder, more insistent, and the mirror began to crack. "Begone, Azrael!" Dr. Collins shouted. "You have no power here." The mirror shattered, and a piercing scream filled the room. I felt a surge of energy, and the pressure lifted. For a moment, everything was still. I opened my eyes to see Azrael's form dissipating, his face contorted in rage. But then, the room grew darker. A cold, malevolent laughter echoed around us. Azrael's voice filled my mind. "You cannot escape me, Jake. I will always be with you." I felt a sharp pain in my head, and the world spun around me. I collapsed, clutching my head, as images of Emily and Azrael flooded my mind. I could hear Dr. Collins and Lisa shouting, but their voices seemed distant, drowned out by the demonic presence. When I woke up, I was alone. The room was in shambles, the circle broken, and the mirror shattered into countless pieces. Dr. Collins and Lisa were nowhere to be seen. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented and terrified. I grabbed my phone and called Mike, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "Jake, what's going on?" Mike's voice was filled with concern. "I need help," I croaked. "Please, Mike, come get me." Mike arrived within minutes, his face pale with worry. He helped me to his car, and we drove in silence, heading back to his place. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come out right. All I could think about was Azrael's laughter and Emily's twisted smile. When we got to Mike's place, he insisted on calling the police and a priest. I didn't argue. I was too exhausted, too broken. The police arrived first, taking statements and looking around the motel room. They found no trace of Dr. Collins or Lisa. It was like they had vanished into thin air. The priest arrived shortly after, an older man with a kind face. He listened to my story with a grave expression and agreed to perform a blessing and exorcism. Mike stayed by my side, his presence a small comfort in the midst of the chaos. The priest set up a small altar in Mike's living room, lighting candles and incense. He began to pray, his voice steady and calm. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me, but it was short-lived. The temperature dropped, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive. Azrael's voice echoed around us. "You cannot escape me, Jake. You are mine." The priest continued his prayers, his voice unwavering. I felt a pressure building in my chest, and the room seemed to close in around me. The candles flickered, and I saw Emily's face in the shadows, her eyes empty and cold. "Join me, Jake," she whispered. "It's the only way." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No, Emily, I can't." The pressure grew more intense, and I felt like I was being torn apart. The priest's prayers reached a crescendo, and a bright light filled the room. Azrael's scream echoed in my mind, and the shadows receded. I collapsed, gasping for breath. When I opened my eyes, the room was quiet. The oppressive feeling was gone, and the air felt lighter. The priest looked exhausted, but relieved. "It's over, Jake," he said softly. "You're free." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling. that it wasn't truly over. Azrael's voice still echoed in my mind, a dark reminder of the horror I had faced. I thanked the priest and Mike, grateful for their help, but deep down, I knew I would never be the same. It's been a few weeks now, and I'm trying to rebuild my life. I still have nightmares, and I still feel a lingering presence, but I'm trying to move forward. I don't know what happened to Dr. Collins and Lisa, and I fear they may have paid the ultimate price for trying to help me. If you're reading this, please be careful. The occult is not something to be taken lightly. I thought I was helping Emily, but I unleashed something far more dangerous. Azrael may be gone, but the scars he left behind will never truly heal. Thank you to everyone who supported me and offered advice. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm trying to stay hopeful. If there's one thing I've learned from this ordeal, it's that there are forces out there we can't understand, and sometimes the best thing we can do is leave them alone.